Welcome back to Garden Talk, brought to you by the Penn State Erie County Extension Master Gardeners. I'm your co-host for today, Mike Bailey, and along with me is...
Ellen Diplacido.
And Ellen has suggested that we take a little bit of a sidebar here and talk about something a little bit different as opposed to continuing our discussion of gardening methods, which we will get back to, in the near future here. But you noticed that what's coming up here in a very short distance here?
Mother's Day.
Mother's Day.
And we like to talk about hanging baskets because a lot of us go out and purchase hanging baskets for our wives or our mothers.
No, very good. That's wonderful. And what were some of your concerns about these hanging baskets? What do you think some of the people should think about as they go out and make these kind of purchases?
Well, there are a couple things. You want to think about what somebody might like to get, but when you do that, you want to think about location and climate when you purchase these hanging plants.
You're right.
Because,
Yeah, you need to look at that tag. Is this a full sun or is this partial sun or is this a shade? Because there's a lot of different, plants that they put into hanging baskets anymore. And you also have to consider the location where they might be hanging at the recipient's house, correct?
Right. Like you had mentioned, your patio or porch faces the south, correct?
No, well,
so you would
west.
have a lot of sun. The
Yeah.
west.
Yeah.
So you would have a lot of wind if it got windy and the sun. So
Yeah.
you want to be careful what kind of a plant you get and where you are able to locate that plant.
You're right, and one of the interesting things is that the climate in May on my front porch is a whole lot different than a climate in July and August, and I have to kind of take that into consideration because the intensity of the sun is a whole lot different between those two periods of time. So what I put there in May might do very, very well. But then when July and August comes, I have to kind of, maybe alter that situation a little bit and maybe even alter where I have the plants hanging because they will dry out in a hurry. They will be, get blown around by some strong winds of some summer storms. So you got to think about what kind of a location you're going to end up putting that in. Okay? And certainly the amount of sun is important. Certainly the size of the plant. Some plants dry out a little bit easier than others, right? I mean, I had a hanging basket that had geraniums in it a couple of years ago. Boy, that thing really tolerated the heat in the front of my house, and it didn't dry out very quickly at all. But I had some other geranium type things. I mean, not geraniums, petunia type things, and boy, they transpired a lot of water out of that soil, and I really had to kind of keep up with them. So think about the size.
How much water they need could change during the season, too, if your plant gets a lot bigger.
Oh,
absolutely. The soil's going
absolutely.
to dry out a lot quicker, too. So you want to watch that. You want to make sure that it's well-watered. And, Mike, how do you tell if it's well-watered?
Well, what I've got.
Usually test it?
Yeah, what I've gotten used to is I go out on my front porch and I lift the plants up from the bottom. And I get used to their weight. And it's easy to tell the difference between a plant that has a lot of moisture in the soil and a plant that is kind of dried, and needs some supplemental moisture. So, that's when I bring out the watering can or say, well, I'll wait until tomorrow. The other thing that I do is I make sure that those plants get fertilized once a month.
Yes, once a month.
And I use a liquid fertilizer or a fertilizer that'll actually dissolve in water, and I mix it at half strength. And one of the waterings once a month will be of that fertilizer mix, because those plants need some additional nutrients because of their location and their climate and the fact that some of that water is going to drain out of the bottom of those containers.
Right, and so it takes the fertilizer with it when it drains out.
Right. And some of these plants might need to have their blossoms deadheaded, like the geranium that I mentioned a little bit ago.
Especially.
I had to cut those the faded blossoms off. But with other things like petunias and some of the other things, you don't need to do that. They'll deadhead themselves.
Right.
But hanging baskets require a certain amount of attention in consideration of what's going to happen. But you could also make a nice container plant, can't you?
Right. Yes. Potted plants are really nice, and you can either buy them at a greenhouse, a nice greenhouse, or you can buy individual plants and make your own container. pots,
Right.
which are nice. Mm-hmm.
And the key to this whole thing, in my mind, is a large pot.
Make it, yes.
Yes.
Yes, make sure you use a large pot.
Yeah, for what you're trying. Don't try to leave those plants in that green plastic pot that the nursery grew them in.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not going to do well. They need to be transferred to a larger pot, okay, with some good potting soil mix in them. And go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, potted plants are nice because you can move them around. You know, if you have a sunny location and it gets too hot there, it's good. You can move that pot maybe into a more shaded area, get it out of the sun.
Right. And they're not subjected to, a lot of, they don't take the same beating in a wind or a storm, or changing climate as a hanging basket does. Hanging baskets are, in my mindset, are pretty fragile things that need a little bit more care. Taking a container on the garden and filling it up with some decent soil and putting in a variety of plants that you like is a really nice way to go. Because that's my wife and I. We go to the greenhouse. We'll pick out what colors do you want this year, okay? And then we figure out, okay, fine. Will they fit together from a sun perspective need, and things like that. And it always turns out really nice, and we are able to vary that every year. I don't particularly care for the, some of the containers that they make themselves. We like to make our own.
Yeah, I like to make mine too. Yeah, and potted plants kind of dry out less maybe than your hanging baskets do because they're not subject as much to the wind and storms and things like that.
And you can make a potted plant. You can use just about anything for a potted plant. Okay, your imagination is your limitation, but you got to make sure there's some drainage holes, because you don't want it sitting in a puddle. That's very important. Well, Ellen, we're past our 7-minute mark. So we need to kind of bring things to a closure. But I'm glad you brought this subject up. This is a very important thing for people to consider. So, and we're going to swing back to everything every once in a while, and we'll swing back to these hanging baskets and potted plants as we go forward. But thank you for listening. We really appreciate it.
Have a good day.